There we go. Welcome, everybody. My name is Stefan, and I am your Thought Lab host on behalf of L&D Shakers. Glad to see you all here for this an hour and a half session together with Fiorenza and Kirsten. It's such a pleasure to have the both of you here and talking about a topic that I am super enthusiastic about anyway, culture. Um, I'm not going to tell much more than that, honestly, but I welcome the both of you to the floor. Thank you so much, and take it away. They're all yours.
Thank you so much, Stephen. All right,
Thank you for having us.
I'm going to start with sharing my screen, so bear with me just a second. There you go. Can everyone see my screen beyond the pink background? All right. I see some thumbs up, so I'll start. I'll take it away. So thank you everyone for being here today. Kirsten and I are really grateful for the crowd. Thank you, Stephen, as well for hosting us. We have an hour and 30 together. Do not worry, it's not going to be death by slides, death by PowerPoint. We have quite we hope, fun-packed, interactive moments for today with different formats to play all together. All the housekeeping usual stuff, so I'm gonna keep it sweet and short. If you can keep the cameras on throughout the session today, that would be great. Of course, we all know life happens, so that's fine. If you have some particularly noisy background, feel free to put your microphone on mute. Of course, you don't have to, keep it on mute the whole time. I myself may have some noisy background at times. I have some works going on at home. Hopefully they are on their lunch break, so that's not gonna happen today. So fingers crossed. All right, so for those of you who joined us a couple of minutes before the hour or on top of the hours, we started writing down in the chat box where we are calling from. So feel free to carry on with that if you haven't written that down. Kirsten and I were really so excited to see all the different countries and cities that were represented when we looked at the registration forms yesterday. We had more than 20 countries, if I recall correctly. So that's, a super diverse group. So very exciting. And I'm really looking forward to getting to know more of you and also diving into the activities together. All right, we'll briefly introduce ourselves so that you don't feel like you have two complete strangers talking to you. I'm going to hand it over to you, Kirsten.
Thank you, Fiorenza. Yeah, first of all, I'm really, really happy to be here. Thank you for joining us for a topic that's really dear to my heart. It's been that for a long time, at least 20 years. I started dealing with culture more academically. I studied in Germany. I was born and raised in Germany and studied international business with a focus on cross-cultural management, cross-cultural communication. And so these studies took me to various places, and it kind of started making me more aware of cultural difference and also how to be with that. But the main learning happened through living in India for the last 12 years, which has really shaped me and made a big impact on how I do my work now as a cross-cultural coach and as an emotional coach. So I work a lot with people who are in these kind of in-between situations. So many of us, don't live where we necessarily were born and raised. And, that's quite a beautiful and also sometimes maybe challenging place to be, to say, who am I when I'm not when I can't take everything for granted that's going on around me, and when I really need to, dig deep and know myself and understand why I'm reacting the way I am. So it's really, it's an ongoing topic of of interest to me, and so that's why I'm really happy to do this with you, Fiorenza. Thank you for having me and inviting me to be a part of this.
Of course, my pleasure. Thank you, Castine. So I can share also a little bit about me and my background. So I guess my multicultural journey started, really at birth. So I was born in France. I grew up in France into a multicultural family. So I have very strong Italian roots. That's no surprise, perhaps given my name. And I also have a Turkish heritage. And it's always been, I guess it started as interesting / challenging at times, from a young age, because I didn't really have around me other multicultural kids. So it wasn't always easy to relate or to find relatable experience. My family or my parents were not, into the expats type of communities. So growing up, I didn't study anything related to multicultural, but I kind of again encountered that space through work. So before becoming a coach, I work in investment banking in London. And there I was working on emerging markets, and that just kind of expanded my exposure to all the different countries and backgrounds, way more, my circle of friends. And I was lucky also that the bank was present in so many countries. So that was a great first professional experience within the multicultural space. I won't give you my full kind of transition story into coaching, but as I changed career paths and I became a coach, the cultural piece has become something that I've been studying and working on for myself, of course, but more specifically in this context, helping global leaders, helping global teams make the most out of the multicultural cultural exposure or composition that they may find in that team. All right, and like I mentioned, I'm based in London. I've been in London now since 2010, so it's been a little while. All right, I'll come back to you, Kerstin.
Yes, so just to give you a rough idea of what we are looking at today, the idea for today is to really understand culture a little bit more in terms of how it impacts us, particularly in relation to communication. So the topic of culture is very vast, but we're going to focus on communication and how that makes our collaboration and our team performance either better or hinders it in some cases. So we'll shed some light on that. But then we'll also look at how we can understand our own profile better. What is it that really shapes me when I communicate? We'll have some self-reflection on that, and then look into how we can build trust across difference. How can we bridge gaps where there's different orientations and different preferences within the team or within the group of people that we're working with. And then we'll go into a little bit of strategizing on how can we maybe overcome that. And we'll do a lot of that together in brainstormings and to really gather the knowledge that's present here in the room in all of you. So that's a bit of what you can expect from today.
Absolutely. And also wanted to share a little bit of our agenda for our time together. Very much aligned, of course, with the objective and what Kerstin just shared. So we'll start with a bit of an intro around the effectiveness of cross-cultural teams. We'll move into a self-reflection and a reflection as a group around culture. What does that mean? And also what has shaped you. We'll then introduce cross-cultural models and how we could use them as a tool. And from there, we will deep dive into communication. We will explore some of your current challenges, and we will also brainstorm strategies that could be helpful for you, and perhaps also that could inspire your peers who may have similar challenges. And finally, we will have some time for a Q&A session towards the end of our time today. All right, so some of you may love research, may love data, so we thought that we would start with some research data. So Dr. Carol Kovacs of UCLA, and I'm very happy to share the research link with you if you're interested. She has produced fascinating team research demonstrating that culturally diverse teams are either the most effective teams or the most ineffective, and both in terms of productivity and creativity. So if we look at the ineffective side, we see that cultural diversity is leading to misunderstandings, challenges, conflicts within the team. And of course, all of this can hinder creativity and stop productivity. If we look at the highly effective side of things, what do we have? So we see cultural diversity fostering innovation, fostering higher levels of productivity. And also we see an elevated form of communication within the team. That stems from the team's efforts to understand their differences, to understand their unique perspectives, their ideas. So essentially, these high-performing teams have leveraged their cultural diversity as a strength. And there have been efforts, there have been concerted efforts even to discuss and understand the why and also the how, the what as well of their differences. So if we look at, if we take an example, let's take a new product development team, which is made of team members from a variety of cultures, variety of age range, and also a variety of a variety of functional backgrounds. So different cultures, different age range, different functional backgrounds. This team has the opportunity to deliver much more innovative products than an homogeneous counterpart. So same team, but made of an homogeneous range of team members. This potential for high performance is based upon the team's successful efforts towards interacting in a culturally effective way, but also in an appropriate way and being respectful of each other's uniqueness. So what does culture mean? And at this point, I would love to invite you to write in the chat box how you define culture. What is the meaning that these words, perhaps with a capital C, has for you, right? There is no right or wrong answer here. It's very much an open invitation filled with curiosity. I'm also sharing here on the screen two definitions of culture. The first one is culture is the shared ways in which groups of people understand, and interpret the world. And this is by Franz Trompenaars. Probably not the best pronunciation of the name. I do apologize for that. The second definition, culture is the collective programming of the mind which distinguishes the members of one group from another. And this is a definition by Gerd Hofstadter. I'm seeing some definitions come through here on the chat box. I'm gonna read a few. Culture is the lens through which a group of people make sense of their reality. This is what Judith has written. Collective mindset that both shapes and is shaped by individual mindsets. This is from Florentine. Shared beliefs and values by a group of people, by Ines. Yes, yes. So perhaps there are some themes that keep coming in your mind as you reflect about culture. Your own definition of culture may also evolve over time, perhaps get more fine-tuned or richer. So there's no right or wrong there. Feel free to keep your definition coming in the chat, okay? All right. There is also one important thing that Kirsten and I really wanted to mention about culture, and as we think about how we want to define it, and perhaps also how it has shaped us and how it is still shaping us. So it isn't single layered. There isn't just one thing in our life, in our existence, that is building culture. It's very much it's very much with multiple layers, or with several influences, if you like. So quite complex in itself. So here on this slide, we've attempted to illustrate the main layers, the main influences. So we have the geographical layers. So where you grew up, where is it that you found, that you spent, your formative years? Where were you during those formative years? Which culture or cultures were you exposed to? Where do you live now? Where have you lived in your life? The longer you live in a place, the more it's gonna have an influence on you, right? The work that you do, that is also a possible layer. The industry, the function, the profession that you have worked in. Perhaps you have worked in sales, that may have shaped you. Perhaps you work in N&D, and that has shaped you, that is shaping you. Perhaps you've moved across different profession, across different sector. The transition itself may have shaped you. And then, of course, you as an individual, that is a very important layer, actually even layers. We have on one side the intrinsic factors, the natural factors. And on the other side, we also have the extrinsic or the nurture factors. So in intrinsic factors, within intrinsic factors, we have things like personality, our character, our temperament. Within extrinsic factors, we have things like our family, our community, our religion. Perhaps sometimes we have the family, community, religion that we were in growing up, and then we have the chosen one. Right? And those may be the same, those may be different. We also have, so within extrinsic factors, we also have our education, our formal education, perhaps also our ongoing education as an adult, CPD and all that, for example. We also have our gender expression, which is different, by the way, from gender identity, which would rather be an intrinsic factor. So as you can see, there are so many layers here that have had an influence and that are shaping us. Right, so time for our first activity. So this is gonna be a breakout room activity. You will be put into pairs. So small group, hopefully that's cozy and that will provide a safe space as well to discuss. If you do not feel comfortable, or if there's any reason that makes that you cannot participate in this breakout room activity, what I'm going to ask is, could you please put a star on Zoom next to your name, and then we will put you in a separate room. All right, that's the only way for us really to manage this the most effectively. All right, so the breakout room activity is going to be a short and sweet one, 10 minutes. And the invitation is with your partner in the breakout room to reflect and answer the following question. Which culture do you belong to? What are the elements of culture that you identify with the most and the least? And what aspects of your cultural identity have shaped your workplace values, communication styles, and preferences? You can answer the 3 questions, if that works for you, or you can answer any of the questions that resonate the most with you. All right? Any questions at this point, let us know, and Kirsten can kindly answer while I set up the breakout rooms, okay? And certainly I'm gonna write the question in the chat so you all have them while you are in the breakout room. I'm just gonna have a quick look. Participants, how many stars do we have? I'm not seeing any stars. Is that right, Kirsten?
Yeah, I don't see any. And can you remind me, you were requesting something of me and I think I missed that. Is
Or
there
just
something that I can do?
if there are any questions.
Oh yeah, there was one great one, but I think they have left the room about digital cultures, but we can still discuss after that.
No worries. What is happening? I cannot see the breakout room option for some weird
Make
reason.
sure you turn it on in the Zoom portal on the website.
Sorry about that. Is that in settings?
Yeah, in settings, it should be there.
Profile, general. Sorry, everyone. Would you know where it is? Should be automatically.
Renzo, but are you a host of this event?
Yes.
Yeah, then it's in Zoom settings. I guess it's switched off for you. You should come to Zoom as to their side. I don't know, just and change it there.
Yeah, change it in the website.
Yeah, it's on the website.
I am on the settings, but I cannot find it.
Fiorenza, I think what they're saying is in the browser, not on the app. That's what I understood.
Oh, okay. Got it. Sorry. All right. General meeting.
Thank you so much, Antoinette. Fiorenza, there's a link in the chat.
To enable breakout rooms.
Long, short. Once you log into the website,
Yes.
go to settings, in meeting advanced, and there you can turn on breakout rooms.
So I'm on the website. I went to meetings, and the issue is I'm not seeing advanced. All right, so I'm aware that this is taking a long time, and I'm not sure why I cannot see this. What I can suggest, so that we don't waste more time, as everyone hasn't, as there isn't anyone who has put a star by their name, would you mind having this conversation as a group conversation?
Yes, sure.
Yeah, is that okay? I do apologize for this tech issue on my end. Who feels they'd be okay volunteering and starting? I'll put the question back up.
Well, I think I could start. Should I go through the 3 questions? And
Feel free to answer the 3 questions or the one that resonates the most with you.
So which culture do I belong to? I believe many as well. I was born in São Paulo, Brazil. So big city, collectivistic country, and also from an Italian family that also has its characteristics, and also from my mom's side, Lebanese heritage. So like strong with food and sharing a lot around the table. I also traveled a lot and lived in different places. So from the UK, Italy, Germany, India as well, and currently the Netherlands. Maybe I forgot someplace in between, but were quite important ones, also Italy. So I believe this transition and this changing as well, like when I was in Brazil, I moved from São Paulo to Rio, so a big bustling city to a more nature city. That has shaped me a lot in terms of opening to that possibility of living in a different place, having a group of friends and developing in my career. And currently, I believe I belong a lot to the Netherlands. Sometimes I go to, not to the Netherlands, but the Dutch culture I look after too. I think it's very direct, pragmatic, and simpler in a way. I really appreciate that. What are the elements that I identified? I think I already shared. I currently have a problem with this thing of the collectivism that we have in Brazil. So you have to decide things based on what people would expect out of you. And through the years, I have created a space in between that expectation and really what I deliver to and what I actually choose and do. And what has shaped my workplace values, communications, and preference. I think it also shaped a lot throughout my experience, but I believe very strong entrepreneurial spirit. high flexibility and really not focusing on what is not feeling 8 hours a day, but really finding what's important for me in my day. What do I have to deliver, and delivering a high standard, something that I feel comfortable and happy with. And yeah, more open communication and exploring the ability of being vulnerable. And when I feel that I'm not in a vulnerable spot, identifying that and saying, okay, this is a great opportunity. Like, I'm playing padel with a group of people that plays much better than I do, but okay, let's do it. And it's been good. So thank you.
Thank you so much, Larissa, for answering the questions. I really love how in your answers, you really, you know, I felt that you touched on different layers of culture that we were talking about just before. So that's really amazing to hear. Thank you, Larissa. Who would like to share next?
I can go. I'm very connected to Larissa's story, so I'm happy to share because I'm Dutch, but I haven't lived in Holland for the last 15 years. Moving away a little bit from the directness and the pragmatism. I lived 14 years in Brazil. And I just moved to Portugal, and actually coming here to Portugal, I've been here now a month, but we're planning to live here. I'm not sure if I'm arriving as a Brazilian or as a Dutch. It's very confusing because the Portuguese that I speak, and this is also where I think language shapes us so much, is the Portuguese from Brazil. So people identify me as being Brazilian, and I say, yeah, but I'm not really, because I'm from Netherlands, but I also don't connect with that much because I haven't been there for 15 years. My husband is Brazilian, my kids were born there, so I'm very deep rooted in Brazil, even though I don't have anything on me that says that, right? And I love, Larissa, the elements of the culture that you pointed out, because I love the combination of the Brazilian collectiveness, creativity, warmth, culture, deep rooted in nature and also in music and food, and then the sort of pragmatism of the Dutch, which I always kept in my work. Everybody I work with, my clients, they always know I never go around the truth. I'm very straightforward. I'm very good at just telling you how it is. I don't work my way around. Some people don't like it much in Brazil, but this directness of the Dutch I've always kept. And then my family is also not very Dutch because my mom is Polish. So I don't have that deep-rooted Dutchness. That's really, so there's a lot of mixes there. And I like to bring everything to the workplace. And for me, the language we speak is beautiful in the way we shape the way we work as well. So I think that Portuguese, for instance, has a lot of words we can use to make it more about community, whereas the Dutch have a lot of words to make it more direct. So there's something there as well. Connected very much to Larissa. Thank you.
I love it. We should have a chat.
So beautiful, Florentine. Thank you for sharing. And I love seeing the connections, you know, the overlaps in experience, and also what you shared about, you know, being really shaped by an experience of another culture and really imbibing that and seeing the beauty of that, and being able to now integrate it, even if it's maybe not immediately easy. Thank you for sharing. Anybody else?
I can go next. So I'm originally from Brazil. I was born in São Paulo, but I have lived also in many different places. So I grew up in Singapore and spent many years in the US. And this is where I went to university. And I think this is where I got a lot of my working style from. So in the American way of being also very pragmatic, very direct. And then when I moved back to Brazil, I felt a huge shock, because I'm Brazilian, but people there, they have a very different work style. You know, just the way they interact in the office, and they talk a lot, and they are very, how can I say, like very like this way of being Brazilian, you know, and just talking and having coffee and this. And for me, coming from the States, that was a big shock. Also, language-wise, I always spoke Portuguese at home, but I grew up, I mean, in the States, and that's where I got my business vocabulary from. So this was also like relocating, like moving back to Brazil was also difficult in that sense. And then after living in Brazil for a few years, I moved to Spain, to Madrid, got my MBA there, moved back to Brazil. And just 3 years ago, I moved with my family to Paris. So we were there for 1 year, this time with kids. So the process, this whole cultural thing becomes a lot more different, because you have to keep your, or in my opinion, you have to keep your Brazilian, I have to keep my Brazilian roots. And so I moved when my daughter was 1 and my son was 3, so very young. And now we've been in Spain, in Barcelona, for 2 years. So the past 3 years, we've been living in Europe. And so this whole, and we live in a very expat, like international environment. So it's easy in the sense that everyone brings out their own culture, their own ways, often their own norms and everything. And especially at school, the kids are sharing this. And at home, we're really trying to reinforce our own identity with the kids so that they keep it. Because I started my expat life 27 years ago, and I still consider myself very Brazilian, even though I have lived in many different places. So I would like to keep this with my kids. And when I look at who I am as like as a person and as a professional, I really see like the different things that I've gotten from like the different cultures that I've been part of. So I consider myself Brazilian, but culturally speaking, I feel like that I'm like, I have my own culture, you know, like my own diverse culture.
Yeah, there are a couple of things actually you've mentioned there, Tatiana, that really resonated with me. The first one is when you said, you know, having your own, you know, things that make your culture. I remember as well, you know, growing up having our own family Christmas traditions, but actually I didn't realize that my parents made them up until later on when I was invited to, you know, spend Christmas holidays with friends. And, you know, I just assumed that everyone was doing that, but it wasn't the case. And that's just amazing as well, right? It's not, you can create your own. It doesn't have to be from one culture or from another. Beautiful mix can happen. The other thing as well that really resonated in your share was around kind of when you become a parent, how perhaps some perspectives and how you used to see a culture or elements of a culture may feel or may be different all of a sudden, for the better or for the worse. But I've also noticed that with my son, and perhaps even reflecting even more on the impact that certain things can have on you and on your family, and then the generational element coming into play and that evolving as well, right? So yeah, thank you.
I think when you become a parent, you become a lot more aware of these things because you want to pass on to your kids. So, for example, this morning I was listening to Brazilian, like this period of the year in Brazil, it's Festa Junina. It's like a typical Brazilian festival that we have in parties. So I was like, okay, we're going to Brazil. They need to know the songs. It's important for them to understand this. And I tried to bring this into their own little world here, as opposed to as if I was in Brazil, we would be listening to this like on the street, you know? So it's like remembering these things and bringing to their own reality here so that they are part of also the Brazilian culture. So I think it's you think of culture in a different way when you become a parent.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you, Tatiana, for your share. And thank you to everyone else who shared. I really invite you to, you know, keep the answers coming. Feel free to use the chat box if that feels comfortable. At this point, we are going to move on to our cultural frameworks and talking a little bit about that. And I'll pass the microphone to Kirstine, please.
Thank you. Yeah, thank you all for sharing. It's already coming out how many layers there are and how we also choose our, we have the ability to choose our perspectives. And what we're going to look at now a little bit is just the frameworks that are offered to understand culture, maybe from a perspective where we can take a bit of a step back and say, how can we make sense of culture and maybe understand ourselves even better, or the people that we work with or that we interact with on a regular basis. And there are different models. A lot of them are out there. And they all have similar categories that they look at. There's, for example, a certain way each culture, and culture in all the layers, has a certain way of looking at time, for example, has a way of looking at how best to collaborate. What is the best, the most effective way of collaborating? There are cultures where there's a very clear idea that hierarchy matters, and hierarchy gives structure and gives everybody security where they are in the situation, in the work environment, and it helps them be effective. And then there are cultures that are more focused on equality and on collaboration, where there's simply a different approach. What we're trying to do here is to really say there are different dimensions that are salient for cultures. What we are today focusing on is only the communication one. So you might have heard, and I've heard a few of them mentioned, collectivism versus individualism, all these are there, but we're looking at communication today mostly, and especially two different models. One is the culture map by Ehrenmeier, and the second one is the cultural orientations framework by Philip Rosinski. And they have both advantages and disadvantages that we're offering, and that will be part of our reflection today, to say how can we understand culture and make it tangible, because a lot about culture is sometimes a little fuzzy and feels maybe overwhelming. And when we get into overwhelming territory, there's a chance that we go into simplification and judgment of others who are not working and communicating the same way that we do. And the benefit really of cultural frameworks is that we can start to disentangle that and say, okay, there's a different way of doing this, and how do we best come together and define how we want to do work here. That's the idea. And if we can go to the next slide, please. Yes, so that's the one dimension taken from the culture map model, which is, as you can see, placing focus on geographical culture or national culture. And what we've highlighted some of the cultures that were mentioned in the registration form to show also the diversity that we have here in the room, according to this model. And in this model, really, Ehrenmeier wrote a book that is quite frequently used in management and in this context to understand how communication can be different and diverse. So the main differentiation here that is made is between low context and high context. So low context saying we don't know much about each other. Usually these are the rather individualistic cultures where we don't assume, because we don't know much about each other, we need all the information pretty straightforward and very directly to the point, so that we can understand what is needed from us in that moment or in that communication situation. While high context cultures usually share a long historic togetherness, there's more knowledge of each other, there's more knowledge of groups and how they present themselves, how they communicate. That what I, for example, see in India a lot, to say that even by somebody's surname, you can tell roughly which region they're from, what their forefathers might have done professionally, what influences them. That's a typical high context culture. And And so here in this culture map model, we are kind of categorized by national culture. And of course, it's a great entry point. It helps us understand maybe in any certain communication challenge that we face, we could look at this and say, is there something here that I'm maybe missing? You know, what are the influences, my own and those of the other person, that might be shaping how we are trying to make our point? And it can be a great entry point. What I personally feel, there's a limitation here because it clubs us into a very large category of national culture or geography, which we might not identify with. You know, we do change over time, as we've heard today. You know, so many of you already said, you know, you've started changing your own cultural expression based on the places that you've lived in or the places you've worked in. So we do grow over time and we do change our cultural expression accordingly. There's also, so migration is not really taken into account here. And also code switching, you know, the idea that a lot of groups, when they're underrepresented in certain countries, will adapt to the majority culture or to the dominant culture to be safe and to belong and find their place. And we can then not identify them only with their own origin culture, but they've really adapted and kind of closed the gap towards the dominant culture. So there's a lot of influences that are not covered in this model, which is why we are looking today more in detail at the cultural orientations framework. If you can go to the next slide. Yes, which is a little more nuanced, as in it allows us to really see ourselves in our complexity, to say, this is who I am right now. You know, in a year from now, it might be different. This is where I am now with all the influences that I have in my life. And there are 4 main categories when it comes to communication here. So the first one is, again, high context and low context, as discussed in the previous one. But then there are 3 additional ones. One is on the dimension of direct versus indirect. The other one is affective versus neutral. And the last one is formal versus informal. So where do I prefer to communicate on these scales? And so direct versus indirect could be, for example, I mean, coming from Germany is a classical, you know, leaning on the direct spectrum, where things are really put in black and white on an email, made clear that everybody understands what is meant. And even when it's very negative feedback, it will be delivered quite bluntly. Just for the sake of straightforwardness, making sure there's no misunderstanding. And then on the indirect spectrum, it's more maybe about making hints and suggestions that are not very obvious in the and not very straightforward, but are also more directed at maintaining the relationship, making sure that the other person doesn't lose faith and is not cut off from connection in that relationship. So this is a spectrum, and we can be anywhere on that spectrum, and there's really all of them are equal. You know, what this model does here is to normalize that we will find ourselves maybe at different times in our lives on different parts of the spectrum. So I can say for myself, living in India has changed how I see good communication. And I will be now in a different place than before moving to India 15 years ago. I was a different person, a different communicator. So this assessment is what we're going to work with today. And it covers not only your preference, but also your ability. So for example, in this below image that you see, the preference here of the person who filled this out is very clear on clear, direct communication. So they have a very strong preference to put everything very clearly and without any doubt and ambiguity into words. And their ability on the right-hand side is also higher for direct communication. So that means maybe they've really worked a long time in their own cultural context. And so they are very comfortable with using direct language, while their indirect communication is simply not developed as much because maybe they've not needed it when somebody who fills this profile now comes into a situation where they maybe work with a lot of colleagues who have an indirect preference, there might be challenges. So this is where this model becomes developmental in nature. We're not static beings. We're not only defined by our national culture, but instead we can change over time, and we can also set ourselves learning goals over time to say, you know, I'm realizing I'm very clear in my preference. Maybe, you know, can I start seeing the benefits of indirect communication, and can I start using it in certain situations? And also, if I'm not really familiar with indirect communication, can I start learning about it and becoming more comfortable with it? So this is the model that we'll be working with today. If there's any questions, please feel free to put them in the chat. But that's the first rough introduction to the cultural model that we're going to look at today.
Thank you, Kirsty. We wanted to present you with a case scenario to perhaps make things more tangible and have a look at a specific situation and try to decode, understand what may be going on. So Kirsty and I are gonna put on our best acting skills here, and we're gonna play out this dialogue for you. And then we will move into Miro and have a little bit of a reflection on this. All right.
Yeah, so Sophie, how did it go with Nigel?
Well, actually much better than I expected. But you know, these English are so hard to figure out.
What happened? Did you explain everything to him?
Yes, completely. I said that we were very sorry, but that we were not going to be able to meet the deadline this time.
And what happened?
He just said, oh, that's a bit of a nuisance. And then he changed the subject.
Sounds great.
All right. This is the dialogue. We will share the Miro board link in the chat box now for you all to go over. So once, I don't know who is familiar with Miro, who is not familiar with Miro. Once you click on this link, it brings you to Miro, and you should all be able to see different boards there. You do not need to sign up. You should be able to sign in as a visitor. Let us know if you have any issue. What we also suggest is to perhaps reorganize your screen so that you can see at the same time the Miro page and still the gallery in Zoom with everyone's videos. And yes, thank you, Kirsty. The password is in Now Culture. Copy pasted on the chat. So the ask is, we're gonna take 5 minutes here, and the ask is to mark on the direct, indirect continuum, and the other 3 continuum as well related to communication that Kirsty mentioned in the slides prior to this one. How you think that it's going in the dialogue? How do you assess the situation? Where would you mark the dialogue on those 4 different scales? And I think what we agreed on, Kirsten, was to use the emojis, everyone's favorite emojis, to mark where we are. Or are we doing a vote here?
Now we're doing the vote.
We are doing
the vote. The next one is the emojis. Yes.
All right. So you'll be launching the vote, and everyone will get an invitation to vote in just a few moments. I'm gonna stop sharing my screen. And do you want to share your screen, or should I?
Everybody can vote directly. It should be working. I see that 2 people have already submitted it. If anybody has difficulties, let me know. And you can, if you need to go back to this communication scenario, you can also scroll to the right and see it there if you need to read it again. How is everybody with time? Do you need a little more, or are we good to go? You can give me a thumbs up maybe when you're ready. Thank you. We'll take another minute or so. Take your time. It looks like we're Is anybody still working on it so that I don't interrupt you? Looks like we're okay. So let's look at our results together. I hope you can see that. Can everybody see the results? Great. So what has happened here? Let's look at that a little together. Anyone would like to come off mute and explain why they chose what they chose and what they see happen in this scenario? What happened in this communication between Sophie and Nigel?
I suppose I can speak then. It was a bit tough because it was like a very short communication, but you can get something out of it. So I just tried to understand. Okay, it seems that this guy was completely unbothered by the situation, and he's used to direct communication. So I suppose you're also a direct communicator. So that's where I put the votes. I love that they're a bit everywhere in this voting from this group, which also mean that we see things differently as well. So it's not just how you behave towards the other, but also how you read the others. That is a bit different depending on your environment and your culture. And yeah, I just I think, as everyone else, I just dealt with the little conversation I had, and also a bit the way of you speaking I put into it, because you didn't went exactly by the script. So I added also a bit of what you were trying to add, voluntarily or not. That would be interesting to know. And also the way of saying it, because like if you read the same text in different ways, it can come off as different things. So I just went as in you two were the actual people talking there, and it was a realistic scenario and all. And so yeah, it seems like Sophie was being direct, but not being extremely used to be direct. So I put it into the I voted so into the two charts. And while Nigel was absolutely fine with being direct, that's what they've done his whole life. That was the feeling that I got from the conversation. And yeah, so I just tried to see what I got into it. But I find it interesting that the votes are a bit all over the place in the charts.
Absolutely. Yeah, thank you. And thank you for naming, you know, how many layers there are, like in how we delivered it, how that will influence even when something is written in a certain way and then read in a different way, how that entirely changes our perception of the situation. And I mean, that just goes to show how, you know, how much it depends on our perspective when we look at any situation. Yeah, and as you said, I really also enjoy the fact that we're reading the situation very differently. And that shows the complexity of communication. Anything from you, Fiorenza, here?
Yeah, I really appreciate how you said we actually named, you know, how our performance may have impacted this, and perhaps our tone as well. Yeah, very interesting to see on Miro how there is a majority of people thinking that Nigel is indirect and Sophie is rather direct, a direct communicator. I'm keen, and also on the affective side of thing, Nigel seeming more neutral. And there is more, there is also quite a cluster of formal, of informal votes for Sophie versus rather formal votes for Nigel. So I would be interested perhaps to hear about some people in the group here on the direct and indirect. What made you put Nigel in the indirect cluster and Sophie on the direct cluster?
Well, just to speak on that quickly, and I think this is really where you're coming from, because I come, like I mentioned before, I come from the Dutch culture, which is really where I think one of the most direct cultures there is. So for us, the British, and this is all generalizations, I really want to be careful with saying the Dutch, the British, I think this is really important. They're very indirect, because a little bit of a nuisance is a way of saying, oh, we're really screwed, or this is a really bad situation, but it's very soft in a way. And for me, that's very indirect, because I would say, that's a bad situation. We have to fix that. So I think, again, like Giuseppe said as well, it's really where you're coming from, because from another perspective, this could be really rude to say, that's a bit of a nuisance. That's already quite direct. So I think it's really where you're coming from. I put it as indirect. And I think that's also why Sophie had a hard time to understand it as being negative, because she also comes, I think, from a direct culture. But again, it's really where what your point of departure is, right? Where you're looking at it from. So.
Yeah, absolutely. So we didn't share that in our performance, and some of you may have picked this up because it was written on the slide. Laura and Sophie are from the US and Nigel is British. So completely, you know, aligning to what you described there, Florentine. And yes, there are some cultural values perhaps that are coming into the mix here. I'm thinking about the British understatement. Some cultures, perhaps the American culture, would tend to focus more on the superlatives, whereas other culture like the Brits will tend to understate things. So that's a bit of a nuisance, is not gonna be meaning that it doesn't mean the same thing in different culture. It certainly doesn't typically mean the same thing, or rather it doesn't portray the same intensity in the US or in the UK. As an example, the other thing here that some of you may have picked up is on the neutral affective scale, how perhaps Nigel is he more in the neutral to clear space than the effective space. That could be a possibility because he changed the subject, he moved on. Anyone has any thoughts on that?
Yeah, I would say he's much more neutral because he doesn't clearly want to share his emotions, right? He was clearly annoyed with the situation, but it changed the subject immediately. So yeah, I think it's definitely much more neutral and much more indirect as well in his speech.
Yeah. Larissa, you had a question. Sorry, Kirsten.
Yeah, it's just
No
a comment. Can I?
Yeah.
Yes, please.
Do we really know what's Nigel's communication orientation? Because we are hearing from the perspective of Sophie that is talking to Laura. So it's already another layer of interpretation and cultural angles as well.
Absolutely. Yes. Really, the purpose of this exercise for us was really to say our lens matters. You know, the way we read this matters. And yes, absolutely. We cannot for sure say where Nigel falls, even if we know that he's British, maybe by nationality or citizenship, that does not ultimately define who he is. And that's actually why we have this next exercise, where we want to look into more so for all of us individually to look at our own profile. What makes me, you know, the communicator that I am at the moment. And I see there's a hand up from Giuseppe. Would you like to unmute yourself?
Yeah, I was letting you finish first. Or
okay, I'm okay. We can go to the next exercise after your question.
All right,
if that works. Yeah,
sure. So I was wondering, because I'm trying to be kind of a blank slate during this, because I've already delivered something about cultural interpretation and things of the sort, but I reckon you are the expert here in the subject matter. So I'm trying to be a blank slate and trying to understand what's going on. And so I was wondering some of the things that we can see from this data that we have on the screen. And at first I thought, okay, maybe there are some things that are objective. So whatever is your culture, you agree with those things. So it seems most of us went with Nigel is very neutral because it seems unbothered by the situation. He just took it in, it was fine. And then I was seeing that also most of us said that Sophie was informal. But at the same time, it seems from the conversation, she was talking with a friend more than with a co-worker. So with a friend, that would always be more informal. And it really depends who are you also talking with. So is this something that we can consider? Because it reminds me a bit of how the personality types thing was. So like, yeah, you may be more into that, but everyone has a bit of everything in the end, and it depends on which different person you behave in different ways. So is there a part of it in here, or there are some things that are really objective, whatever is your culture, or there are some things that like yeah, just change depending on the person you're dealing with, for example?
That's a great question. I think that's I mean, that's my working hypothesis, that there's no such thing as objective when it comes to communication. There's always the way we read it and the way we send it is individual, is subjective. So that's exactly actually the limitation, I think, of many of these cultural models, because they assume a kind of, and of course, that's not to say that there are not, we're leaning a certain way as a culture. For example, if we talk about national culture, we have a tendency towards one thing, but the challenge is when we club everybody into the same pot and say, okay, because Nigel is British, that means he is XYZ. I think that's what we're trying to say, that there's just a lot of nuance in this, and that makes it very challenging to read, even if you are so-called communication or a cultural expert. I don't believe it means that you can read any situation without doubt, but it's more about becoming curious about what might be at play here. And what you said about context definitely matters. I mean, that's actually what we're going to do now in the second exercise, to say, can you look at your own profile, and especially in the context of work? like what is shaping you? I remember from earlier, you know, I think, I'm not sure who shared, I think she left, about, you know, how we are shaped by the, or Tatiana shared about, you know, being shaped by US American work culture. And even though if we bring a lot of different aspects to our work. So what I would invite you is to go on the mirror board and zoom out a little bit and then move down, one layer down, basically, where you see communication profile high versus low context. Can everybody see that on the screen? And then what I would invite you, you'll see me add this now. So let's say, for example, I'm choosing one of the emojis here on the left side. You can go into the panel on the left and select the stickers and emojis, and then look for one that represents you in this. And I'm just making an example here and saying, you know, maybe for me personally, coming from a very low context culture in Germany, living in India, I would maybe place myself here. Like I'm, you know, my preference has changed. Maybe my high context ability is still rather limited because I'm still learning, I'm still adjusting. And my low context ability is higher because I've grown up with this and I kind of know how to be specific when it needs to be. So you're welcome to just place yourself along all of the 4 dimensions, so high versus low context, and then going all the way to the right, and just marking your own preference. So what do I prefer when I have a choice, full choice? And then ability on both ends, what can I do easily and what maybe takes me more work? And then we'll see a little bit what the patterns are here. So you can take some time, take maybe 3 minutes to fill this out.
What
And
made
if you
me
have
a
any
bit
questions,
confused, if I
yes,
can comment, is that we have
please.
clear on both edges, right? And in
Yes.
my mind, the clear communication is the low context. So it,
Yeah,
it
it
brought a
means
bit of
clear
confusion.
preference. I'm sorry. Yeah,
Okay.
it means clear preference, or I have a mild preference, or I'm neutral. I'm okay both ways. But it means basically I'm very definitely leaning one way, or I'm, you know, I'm flexible. Maybe let's say it like that. Does that make sense? Does that answer your question? Perfect. So you can keep moving to the right. And if you're done, whenever you're done, no rush, please, you're welcome to reflect on, based on this, after filling this out, maybe this already shows you there's something related to communication challenges that you frequently face. And you're welcome to put them down in the underneath on the post-its, to just park them there for our discussion after this. Just for your information, I've shared a PDF with the same form for you, so you can keep it for yourself for later. You can download it from the chat. And while you're thinking about your challenges, see if you feel like you would like to share here in the group. We'll have time for maybe one case today to look together at how to potentially solve this now with the knowledge of these dimensions.
So I can go.
Maybe we'll give everybody another minute or so. How is everybody doing? You can give me a thumbs up if you're done. Thank you.
So the challenge may be a recurring communication challenge that perhaps you are facing at work, or that you faced at works, in your team, with your leader, with some colleague, stakeholder, and a challenge for which you would value getting inputs or insights from the group.
We had one volunteer who had already mentioned they would like to share that challenge. Ines, okay.
Okay, so
would you like to share a bit? Yes.
How should I put it? Finding myself much more having an indirect or a high context profile. It's sometimes a bit difficult to be more direct, more assertive, especially when dealing with teams, managing teams, and having to put my point across. So that is actually a challenge for me.
Do you have any particular situation? Is it, for example, when giving feedback, or is there anything that comes to mind particularly that you would like
Maybe when dealing with conflicts in the workplace, right, and having to manage those conflicts?
Yes. So first of all, I'm hearing you're very clear on your own preference. You know kind of where you fall on the spectrum, and you see that there's a benefit in being more direct in some ways. I'm wondering what you're hoping that would give you. Like what will that do?
I think it would give me a bit more authority when sometimes it's needed.
Yes, yes. And I invite you all, what is your take on this situation? How can we learn to use where we're different to solve this? Any thoughts? There's no wrong answer here.
I could speak here. I don't think this is absolute. Like I see more or less a duality in the options, and that's not the way I think. I think in different contexts, I have different preferences, and even my ability differs in different contexts. So I find it hard to answer it in a binary nature, let's say. But on the other hand, I do appreciate the difference between ability and preference. I didn't think of that before, so I appreciate the fact that it made me think that these two are different, at least.
Thank you. Yes, absolutely. And I'm wondering how that might be helpful for Ines, if you have something to share with that on that, Antonis, if there's something that came up when you heard Ines speak. I mean, what I'm connecting is that there's a chance to look at ability, you know, saying if I'm currently uncomfortable with being direct, that means that I have some assumptions about what being direct does to my relationships, for example, does to my work relationships. There's some fear holding us back potentially. So to say, that's what that's what I'm connecting myself, but I'd love to hear from you what you're making from this, Antonis.
It could be a fear, or it could be unconscious bias that is building up in the way we approach a situation or a conversation. Like we make too many assumptions, and I think in that sense, I'm a bit confused between low context and high context, because it's like I have a different understanding of it, which, like the definition that you give here has to do with whether you approach the conversation with fewer or more words, let's say. Whether in my mind, like context is just providing extra information before going to the point, not so much whether you're making your point directly or not. So yeah, I don't know if that makes sense, because that's the thing that I'm that is usually either a challenge or an opportunity for me personally. Like when there is a complex topic to discuss, I feel like there is more of a requirement to give the different layers before you get into the point. But when it comes to the point of making a point, I prefer being direct, but I'm not always able to. So yeah, I hope that makes sense.
Yeah, it does, and especially does in the grappling for it. You know, I'm hearing you say it's not obvious or easy to solve this. And especially now you're bringing, you know, there's a different maybe definition that you have for what context means and how it influences communication. And so that's I mean, we're dealing with a complex topic, so we appreciate that we only have 90 minutes to kind of work through this together today. And there is definitely, what I'm hearing here, ambiguity, and a sense of not knowing exactly where do I fall and how do I use this now. And that's why I think this is not necessarily I think this is an art, like something that we learn over time and that we practice over time. And it's not, unfortunately, nothing that I personally can give direct answer to. Can you, Fiorenza? Is there something that comes up for you?
I'm feeling pretty much aligned with how you addressed this point, Kerstin. And I very much also, you know, appreciate what Antonis mentioned. ability and preference really comes into play. Giuseppe, yes, you have your hand raised.
Yes, it was about what Ines shared, that it's her, let's say, her issue communication-wise, and then I was seeing also through her emoji that her preference is to be more indirect, more effective, which is also in line with what I've worked a lot with people from Italy, Spain, and Portugal, and we all kind of share in a. If we zoom out, we share kind of the same thing. And it is tough, and it started as being very tough for me as well to be assertive in tough situation, because it's either I was letting everyone walk on me basically, or I was going completely ballistic, and it was not good for anyone. So there was nothing in between, and I think that in between it lays the healthy way of doing conversation. So I don't really know how to further interpret the 4 areas that we have here, also because, for example, excellent, good, fair, I don't really know the distinction yet. But what I can tell, maybe something that helped me going from being fully Italian about it to being a bit more Dutch about it, if you want. It was what is called Mithridatism. So basically, I would force myself to be a little bit more assertive even when I don't feel like it, nor I feel ballistic about it. You do it, you see you're still alive after it, so it comes easier the next time to do it. And so it's small things that you do over time, and the more you do it, the more you get used to it. So at least in my case, this helped a lot. To the point that I remember, because also we have some people with Dutch heritage here, and I remember when I was into a convention, and I was always pinning down the people talking for saying things that I felt were not thoroughly researched. And at the end of it, someone came to me speaking in Dutch, and I was like, I'm sorry, I have no clue what you're saying. Could you say it in English? They say, oh, sorry, I thought you were Dutch for the way you were talking in the convention. I say, aha, okay, then maybe it worked. So yeah, so Mithridatism, basically, it comes from the idea of injecting small doses of poison and to become immune to it over time. And it's kind of what I did with it. I was trying to be a bit more assertive, a bit more direct, a bit more blunt, without being offending, without offending the other person, but still being blunt to the point that they get my point gets across easily. And over time, it became incredibly easier. Now I'm way more prone to be that direct than going around it, after you realize how much time is saved, and how if you prepare the person to receive direct comments, their ego won't get in the way, and then it's way easier to communicate.
Thank you so much, Giuseppe. And there's really a couple of things that you mentioned that resonated that I also want to offer, Ines, if that's all right. Perhaps, when we are working on things like assertiveness or being more direct, and we know why it's important for us, there are, a number of great reasons. Not putting pressure, so perhaps not putting pressure on ourselves that it needs to happen overnight, but really it's going to be a series of small baby steps. So perhaps today you've been 2% more assertive than yesterday, and that's already such a huge progress. So really kind of, being kind and compassionate with yourself in the same way as you probably would with someone else. And the other thing that came up as well is, what do you need to be more assertive? Are there things that, so for example, if I'm eye contact, which I tend to be, I like to have a certain amount of information that actually helps me. It helps my internal process, my thought process. But I'm also aware that the other people, even if it's someone in my team, they might not know that. So perhaps if I'm able to share that with them, then one, they're aware, but then also they can make it a little bit easier for me. So just kind of, giving you some thoughts, food for thought, hopefully here.
And just maybe to jump in with one last point, and I know we're over time, and thank you for staying with us. I think that's one of the main recommendations in cross-cultural communication, is to, even if we have a tendency to towards indirectness, to keep things more on the direct spectrum when we work across different preferences, because it is a tool to help us come to solutions, as Firenze just said, to be kind of to self-disclose and say, this is where I fall and this is what I need, you know, and to be more transparent about our process rather than just communicating our message, but more making our thinking transparent. And I think that's maybe one of the points that we can, take with this. Yeah, thank you so much.
Thank you.
And so coming to a close, like Kirsten said, we really are grateful for the extra time and for joining us today. Would you like to bring us through the next steps, Kirsten, for those of you that are interested?
Yeah, just as a brief info, you can go to the link that we have here on the screen and take the full assessment, the full cultural orientation framework assessment for free under this link. So it doesn't only include the communication dimensions, but all of the cultural dimensions. Maybe that's interesting to see and go through. And if you ever want to chat with us about it and debrief it, you're welcome to be in touch. Yeah, and then of course, if you have a team where you would like to look at the whole, make a cultural audit where you see all of the preferences and abilities of everybody in the team, we also have that option. But that's, we look forward to hearing from you.
We will stay around for a few more minutes if any of you have some questions. We apologize to having run out of time for that. So if you have the time, feel free to hang around. If not, absolutely okay. You can also reach us by email or LinkedIn or in the L&D community. So once more, thank you all so much. Really appreciated the comments and the participation and the open mind. And thank you, Stephen, for having us today for this Thought Lab.
Absolutely. Just a round of applause to you, Firenze and Kirsten, for this wonderful Thought Lab here. I'm glad to have hosted you where I've hosted you, and so exciting to see everybody grasping this topic called culture, and what I also think can be quite complex at times, but also allows us to grow so much. Thank you, thank you, thank you. As you know, this is a recorded session. You can always come back to it later on YouTube, where we'll be posting it. And in the next few days, I'll make sure to finish that off. And if you need to share it with some people that can learn a little bit about culture in your team, you can always refer them back to this one right here. For now, thank you so much, and wish you all a wonderful rest of your week.
Thank you. Bye-bye.